Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and the fit for this video is my own Data Over Dogma hoodie. Let's take a look at a video.
As Christians, we shouldn't be celebrating Easter at all. Easter is not a Christian holiday.
All right, let's see it.
Easter comes from ancient Babylon.
No, it absolutely does not. Easter is a Christian adaptation of the Jewish Passover, which is why the overwhelming majority of Christians around the world today, and ever since Easter began, have always referred to it as some variation on the Hebrew word Pesach, which means Passover. Easter is a name that is only used in German and English and a couple of other Germanic languages, and it is a late secondary name that was adopted by Christians living in Europe probably in the 700s or 800s CE, and they borrowed it from the Anglo-Saxon name of the month of April, Ostermonat, and according to the Venerable Beda, Anglo-Saxons came up with that name based on their own Germanic spring goddess, Eostra. And despite what you will hear all over the internet, there is not a single shred of data from anywhere remotely approximating the ancient world that supports the notion that Easter borrows absolutely anything other than that name from this Germanic spring goddess. The notion that this spring goddess was associated with rabbits and eggs and fertility and all the things that we do in Easter is something that folklorists in the 19th century made up, and it's not based on any data from the ancient world.
Some people are doing it ignorantly. They haven't heard that Easter is a Babylonian holiday, but some people have heard it and do know and have gotten the information and they refuse it.
Some people have the capacity for critical thought.
So in ancient Babylon, there was a goddess that they worshipped named Semiramis.
No, there wasn't. In 9th century Assyria, there was a queen named Shamuramat. And in 5th century BCE and 1st century BCE, Greco-Roman writings coming from authors named Ctesias and Diodorus Siculus, they made up a divine figure called Semiramis that is based on the combination of Shamuramat and traditions associated with Ishtar/Inanna/Astarte. And this is known as Naru literature. This is where you take a historical figure and then you elaborate on them and create these narratives that are drawn from other places and particularly from myth to make them sound a lot cooler than they really were. And in the 19th century, a man named Alexander Hislop wrote a book called The Two Babylons, which was basically an anti-Catholic screed that tried to take up these traditions that had been made up by Ctesias and Diodorus Siculus and tried to create a historical narrative about this figure and then tried to link that with the development of the Catholic Church and suggest that it is the Church of Satan. And it's just a misguided, ahistorical, anti-Catholic screed that unfortunately has been picked up by people on the internet today as if it were historical fact, and it's not.
She was the goddess of fertility, and they used to celebrate her by basically, I'm just going to say it, having a big orgy.
No, they did not. This is entirely made up, and it is one of the oldest and most idiotic conspiracy theories in the book. They engage in ritual sex and sacrifice babies is exactly what early Romans said about early Christians in order to try to vilify and demonize them.
They adopted the rabbit as a symbol because rabbits are very, what's the word I'm looking for? Promiscuous?
No, they didn't, and that image is of a Mayan artifact from less than 1400 years ago. The association of rabbits with Easter was formalized in the 19th century, and it was based on a tradition that comes from medieval Europe, which was based on the observation that the European brown hare can conceive a second litter before it has given birth to the first, which means it can birth a litter and then very shortly after birth another, seemingly without going through a full gestational period. And so within medieval Europe, it was associated with parthenogenesis, with virgin birth, which means it was associated with the Virgin Mary. And so you see woodcuts and you see iconography where Mary has hairs around her or is holding hairs. And so hairs become associated with the Virgin Mary, become associated with Jesus, and in the 19th century, that becomes formalized as rabbits becoming associated with Easter. It is an internal Christian development.
So that's why they adopted the rabbit as a symbol. They also adopted the egg as a symbol of fertility.
No, they didn't. Eggs, just like rabbits, became formally associated with Easter in the 19th century, but that also goes back to a medieval European tradition. Easter marks the end of Lent, and in medieval Europe, they fasted from meat and dairy and things like that during Lent. Eggs keep a lot better than milk and cheese and meat, and so there were a lot of eggs around at the end of Lent, so it became traditional to celebrate the end of Lent with eggs. And then the elites began to exchange eggs, and they would paint them in symbolic colors: red for the blood of Jesus, green for new birth, yellow for joy. And so that is where the association of eggs with the celebration of Easter comes from, and it becomes formalized as we know it today in the 19th century.
And they would have these huge orgies, and obviously there would be a lot of pregnancies during this time. The babies would be born 9 months later, right around Christmas time, go figure. And then 3 months after that, we have Easter again. And the babies that were born 3 months earlier from the pregnancies that took place the Easter before, they would take these babies and offer these babies to their God.
No, they wouldn't. This is another absolutely asinine conspiracy theory that was fabricated out of thin air and is not supported by any data whatsoever from the ancient world.
And then they would take the eggs that they adopted as their symbol, and they would dip these eggs in the red substance that came from the baby's offerings. And this is where dying Easter eggs come from. This is where that tradition comes from.
No, it is absolutely not.
And Ishtar, which sounds oddly familiar to Easter. Ishtar, Easter. Yeah. Lines up.
No, it doesn't.
If I were y'all, I would look into this. I would research it, research the occult origins of Easter.
Pro tip: before you go research it by Googling occult origins of Easter, learn how to research.